everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Oxford Policy Podcast. My name is Belén Tomic. I'm an MPP student, and today I'm excited to be joined by two brilliant scholars working at the intersection of gender, social policy, and the politics of care. First, I would like to welcome Dr. Belén Villegas Plá, departmental lecturer in the political economy of Latin America at the University of Oxford. She is a political economist whose research focuses on inequality and development, as well as social protection and the care economy. Her work examines the political economy of distributive policies in Latin America, as well as social reproduction and care. And I'm also thrilled to welcome Dr. Rossella Ciccia, Associate Professor of Social Policy at the Department of Social Policy and Intervention at the University of Oxford, as well as a Fellow of Green Templeton College. Her research lies in the field of comparative social policy, with a particular focus on gender, social inequalities, care and paid work in Europe and Latin America. She has also led major international research projects on gender equality and care policy, receiving international recognition for its contributions to feminist scholarship and inequality research. Belén, Rossella, thank you so much for joining us today in this episode. To begin, I'd like to start a little bit more personally before we dive into the discussion. Both of you have spent several years studying care, gender, and social and economic policies, topics that have become central to the political debate nowadays. So I would like to question you, how did each of you first become interested in studying care? Was there a particular political moment, intellectual influence, or personal experience in your life, for instance, that make you become interested in this field?
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here and to have the opportunity to talk about these topics. In my case, I think that I became interested in this topic because I'm Uruguayan. And in Uruguay, when I was finishing my degree, my bachelor degree, there was this amazing discussion about how important was to include care in the social protection system. And it was a really interesting discussions that include feminist movement, policymakers, the student movement. So I think that I got really interested on that at this time. And also because, well, Uruguay was the first country in implementing a national care law in Latin America. So I think that, this interest born there. And after that, I had the opportunity to work with amazing feminist scholars like Juliana Martinez Franzoni, but some important also scholars in Uruguay. So yes, this was the story, I think.
Thank you.
So I think compared to Belén, maybe I discovered it a bit later. I think my interest sparked during my PhD studies. I was doing a PhD, it was in comparative European social policy, and I was looking at the concept of labor. I was trying to develop the concept of labor regime and its relation to welfare regime. And of course, you bump into care and women. And I got really interested in it so much that I included care regimes in my dissertation, in my research. And then over time, care kind of took over my interest because I moved from kind of like, labor and class to gender and care work, and then actually to care more broadly and to also a wider set of inequalities. And I think, for me, it was, I started also to read much more feminist work. And I moved on to do a PhD with Mieke Verloo in the Netherlands. And she gave me Nancy Fraser. And it was a turning point. And I think now, it's not so much my interest in care. It's not only on care policies, but I really see care as a lens to study a wider set of issues. And it's not only about gender, but intersectionality and a wider set of inequality. So I found many feminist thinkers have inspired my work, but I think I found care super productive as a framework to study loads of things that have to do with the state.
Thank you very much for your insights. Now, going one step backwards, I'd like to continue with what might sound like a really simple question, but it can actually be a really complex one. When we talk about care, what are we actually talking about? Because care can mean different things. It can mean childcare, care for older people, support for people with disabilities, domestic work. And at the same time, the concept of care itself seems to have evolved significantly over time. academically and politically. So if you could tell us more about this concept, why it is important to define this concept, or maybe it is important to have a more broad concept of care, a specific concept of care, and the utility of these decisions?
Mm-hmm.
Eh?
Go ahead.
No, I like, many that write about care note this, that care has many meanings. And I think that points to the fact that actually there are many academic and political communities that revolve around care. And so people say care is polysemic, and I say care is contentious. And so these different actors give it different meanings. And even within feminism, it's like care is labor, care is a right, care is an obligation. There is also a dark side to care because care is also oppression. And it's about a power imbalances. So I think all of these things are true. And I don't try to delimit care too much, but I do like to say that care, because I think all of these meanings are productive. But I do like to say that care is more than labor, and it's about the relationship between individuals. And in this view, for me, care it's about discussing care, debating the meaning of care is debating about the meaning of dependence and autonomy and vulnerability in society. So it's a broader discourse. Yes, and I think that's the richness of care. It's not this fuzziness of the care concept is a strength.
I completely agree. And I also think that has this kind of polysemic notion is super important to actually have the opportunity to implement care public policies because it gives you the opportunity to build a strong alliance between different movements, right? So if you have this care agenda that connects labor issues with human rights issues, with the right to receive and to provide care, and gender inequality and so on, you have this big shot of having the opportunity to build this broad alliance, these broad coalitions that are so important. Then, when you want to have a concrete public policy, and we haven't seen that a lot in Latin America. In fact, the opportunity of having this alliance has been crucial in the narrative, but also in the implementation of these national care systems. And I think that is also happening at the global level. And having this broad umbrella, this broad concept, is also important to build alliance between movements in different parts of the world. Not just within the global south, but also between the global south and feminist movement in the global north, and also connect this discussion with other agendas like the taking care of natural resources. That is also important and is also really crucial in how we connect with care and how care is provided, especially in the global south that is so dependent on natural resources and is subject a lot to this new extractivism that it's also part of the discussion because it really affects how we can provide and can receive care.
Thank you. Thank you for your answers. And related to what were you discussing, one concept that appears frequently in both feminist scholarship and policy debates is another concept that is a concept of the social organization of care. In other words, how care responsibilities are distributed among the family, the state, the market, and communities. So one of the interesting tensions in this debate is that care is often treated as something natural or morally expected within the families, and not only within the families, but the women within the families. So rather than as a work or as a collective social responsibility. So, in your opinion, how important is it to challenge that assumption? And how has that naturalization of care shaped gender inequalities more broadly nowadays, in your opinion?
I think that is like at the core of this topic, right? Gender inequality is at the core of care debates and should always be, because we know that in general, care is provided within families and within communities, especially in the global south, and is mostly carried out by women. Uh, And we also know that this affects many different aspects of inequality. So one of the reasons why women, especially in developing countries, are outside the labor market is because they say that they have to take care of members of the family or even within the communities. And as we can imagine easily, this has a lot of effects in their labor trajectories, but also in the kind of possibilities that they could have to have an autonomous life in many ways. So I think that, yeah, it's crucial to always remember that care is, as you said, a contested issue strongly related with care, with gender inequalities.
Yeah. And the relationship between family and care quite interesting. I think it's not been unpacked so much. I think, like, I agree with everything that Belen said. Of course, like, the fact that, everywhere, even in those countries that have a social organization of care where market or the state or communities play a bigger role, families are still the main care providers, and that means women. And so it's at the core of gender equality. But I think going back to what you were saying about alliances and coalitions, it's also important to recognize another thing. One is that, like, the social organization of care is not only gender, it's classist, racialized. It is imbued with prejudice against disabled, able-bodied people or disabled people. It is also has biases towards age. And so it reproduces all kinds of inequality. So making the family the central institution for care does not only create gender inequality, it also means that families have different resources and they don't have the same ability to care. So, and here is where class and race come to the fore. It also like brings really strongly in, I think, the role of the state because only the state, in a way, can like equalize like the resources of family. So again, it brings in this link between the care receivers, women, and the care and the caregivers, women, and the people in need of care. Because every time we make the family, we burden the family, we put all the weight on the family. We are like creating gender inequalities, but we're also creating like inequalities in access to caring resources. And also not all families are the same. Some families have more support and some families are less recognized by the state. So sexuality is also another like act of inequality that comes in, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So, while care has long been central to feminist scholarship, social movements, and social policy debates, it seems to have moved much more forcibly into mainstream political discussion in recent years. So, why do you think care has gained this renewed political visibility or momentum over the past decade?
So I think, like many people say, it's because there is a care crisis or it's because of COVID. And I slightly disagree because I think the care crisis is something that has been there for a long time. Even in countries that acknowledge it just now, the notion of care crisis point to the mismatch between the supply and the demand for care. There has always been a mismatch in the sense that, like, there was never enough care. It was always overly concentrated on people, women. Women have entered the labor market decades ago, sometimes informally. They've never left it. Male breadwinner jobs have been eroding for decades. So I think, this notion of care crisis point to the fact that the social arrangement around care is like, it's in crisis, right? But this has been in crisis for a long time. So one element creates a demand, but, someone needs to do something about it. COVID the same. I think COVID gave, I don't like when people say it was a window of opportunities for care because I think it's a poor choice of words if we remember what COVID has been. Yes, it has drawn attention to the scarcity of care resources. I remember ILO calling it a care catastrophe, and I totally agree. But it didn't shift much in many countries. Not only like it put it on the agenda, and we need to ask ourselves if it was more of a rhetorical move or a deeply felt political stance. put it on the agenda, but at the same time, we blocked it there because we said there is no resources because of COVID. There is all these problems that we need to tackle. Think about our healthcare systems in Europe are faring, for instance. Let's not even talk about social care and childcare. So I think, all of these are part of the context in which actors move, but they're not the causes themselves of a change. I think we have international organizations such as ILO and UN organizations, the PAL, have done a great work. Within them, feminist academics have been and feminist activists have been very, very active. They have spread knowledge. They have spread like wonderful ideas. I think I really admire that work. I think also there are some feminist academics that go around and try to make change happen. And I think also a lot of local activism. So I think the political visibility is due the increased political visibility, which I put a question mark on, but let's say it's there. I think it's due to this long, like decades of mobilization of within international organization on the ground from feminist actors, but also domestic workers were one of the first to actually put the issue on the agenda and get an impact. The movement of disabled people that have demanded independent living movement that have demanded more state provided care. I think that's my view. Like that these actors, decades of activation of these actors. I would even say from the 1990s, it didn't happen overnight. Have kind of like trying to put the spotlight on this issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And also, I think that in different moments, I think that there are kind of these, yeah, I wouldn't say windows of opportunity, but yeah, opportunities to have certain political issues in the spotlight. And I think that I agree with that feminist academia, feminist movement, and all these different kind of movements has been extremely important in highlighting how important is care as a public policy. But I also think that besides the COVID, in certain regions of the world, there were things happening that were also important. And one of the things I think that it was, like in particular in Latin America, the increase of progressive movements and progressive political parties in government. That because we need to remember that at the end of the day, social alliance and civil society need build strong coalitions with political parties. And I think that this was also part of the explanation why care increased so much in the political agenda. But one thing that I want to say before finishing this answer is that we know that all of these elements influence how a topic became important in the political agenda. But when a topic is there, we can't control what is happening, So care is in the public agenda, is how, as you said, mainstreaming in a way. And that also means that there are more actors from different political angles and different positions trying to shape in a well what care will mean. So yeah.
And maybe just to add to what you said, and I don't disagree with anything you said, but I think we also need to be careful and watchful of the fact that care is a core issue also for the far right. It's not only the progressive actors that want to shape care policy. Of course, it's also the far right has an interest in care and it's implementing reforms. Like in my own country, Italy, we haven't had a reform. We say it's a frozen landscape in care policy. The party that is doing reforms now is our current government, and it's not a progressive actor.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's like the political visibility is not only on the left, it's also on the right as gender come to the fore as the key issue for them.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, this is the thing that if the topic is in the spotlight, everyone you need to address that in a way or another, right? And just to finish that answer, what we are seeing now at the global level, as you mentioned, and specifically also in regions like Latin America, is this rising of the new right, which has this conservative angle that we probably didn't see as much in the traditional right. So this is also important to pay attention to what is going to happen with these debates about care, because as you said, it's there, and yeah, it's going to be shaped by many different actors.
And anti-gender actors
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
that's true.
Yeah. Well, building in what you were actually now discussing, even when care becomes politically salient and publicly valued, transforming those demands into durable public policies seems incredibly difficult nowadays. And in Latin America, especially, some of the most ambitious care agendas, as some of you were mentioning, have emerged in contexts marked by inequality, fragmented social protection systems, limited state capacity. So, how do you make sense of that politically silent movement in Latin America? Would you say that this is like a kind of paradox? Is it really a paradox that is going on in Latin America right now?
Um, I don't think that it's a paradox. I think that, well, Latin America is, as you said, a really heterogeneous region. So you have different realities. I think that you have some countries in which, for instance, political parties or even the state has a strong alliance with the civil society, and civil society is strongly organized. So in these cases, let's say Uruguay as an example, you have this kind of agenda that is more condensed in a way, and it's clear because when these issues arrives in the political debate in Congress, they already, or these groups already agree in the main key points that the care public policies are going to be as public policies. But I think that what is also happening is that in some countries you have this strong disconnection between civil society. The organization of civil society is weak and fragmented, and it's not. It doesn't have strong linkages with political parties or with the state. So in that case, what happened, and it's not just an issue related with care, in general, it happened with every single discussion about well-being, is that you have really broad and ambitious discussion on the one side that is difficult to translate in public policies. And I think that part of this is what is happening in Latin America. You have this ambitious discussion about care that involves care for the environment, care for like a different group of people, improving welfare state, um, um, including care as a resistance. But translate all of that in concrete public policies is a different problem. And in that way, I think that there should be some translation because to build public policies, you need more concrete discussions that will involve discussions about budgeting and also, as I said before, the political alliance that you can build to promote these kind of public policies.
And bureaucracies and technical
Yeah.
technical knowledge, a lot of things. But going back to what you were saying, so I think like the fact that for a care scholar, there is no region that is as exciting as Latin America today. So it's wonderful to see all of this bubbling of innovation. Quite the opposite to look at Europe. Uh, but it's so why in Latin America? I think what you said is true, but I think also the fact that this welfare, I mean, and we should say that the region has many heterogeneity, but let's just like, kind of not talk about this now, and let's just talk about the main, like, kind of like some common feature of welfare state in the region. So high inequality, limited tax base, fragmented, segmented social protection, and high informality. All of this created a demand for care and for universal care system. And I think in this space is where, like, these actors, the way you were talking about, an international organization, I think CEPAL did a lot of work, also with the Uruguayan government, have inserted themselves and planted a seed. And so I think that's the part of the answer. I do wonder though, because I mean, Latin America was also the region of conditional cash transfer. I remember a report of CEPAL that said it's a truly Latin American invention, and it was exported worldwide. Was very successful. But it's like, conditional cash transfers were also about care, even though from the point of view of children, maybe more. Um, but they also enforce some kind of role for mothers, right? And so this also shows the shift of a development paradigm from strict conditionality towards something else. So I think it's also the legacy of conditional cash transfer that created the condition for this. And then I think other things maybe that happened in the region is that once Uruguay launched its integrated care system, which became an international benchmark, I mean, everyone wants to learn from Uruguay, despite some gaps in implementation. And then it was kind of like a contagion effect and then a reputation effect. We've seen that with Nordic European countries. Once they became the gender equality countries, they wanted to maintain that reputation. So I think, there's has been also like regional learning and also like some kind of reputation effect that foster um the just foster these reforms. But it's very interesting also because I think you've written in your work, Belén, it's really interesting to understand how the national differences shape the characteristics and the feature of the system because they're not all the same. And we need to understand better, both in terms of laws, but also in terms of implementation, what's happening.
Yeah, I think that um, there is a timing issue in the way that I think that to put this topic in the political agenda, I think that governments and in general social movements and so on need to have this kind of broad discussions. And now the challenge is to translate that in public policies. And I think, following what you are saying, that different Latin American countries need to, in a way, do different things. Because in some countries, and I think that it's important to remember that in Latin America, there are some countries that don't even have the possibility of do what a state should do at the minimum requirement, like has the monopoly of the violence of the control of the territory in the whole country. This is not even a possibility in some Latin American countries. So in that specific cases, talk about building a strong welfare state that includes care could be really challenging. And I think that this is why, we need to work a lot of in the characteristics, the long-term characteristics that each country has.
But then that's also like, another challenge is because of this, what happens is that, we have very ambitious laws in some countries, but then we have, I wouldn't even say poor implementation. The implementation is from the start building on the existing, but not ambitiously adding to the existing, just trying to coordinate and like, put together what is existing. And since what is existing is often targeted to the more needy people, or it's only acts on some axis, um, then we have very piecemeal reforms that are very very far from the principles and the ambition of the law. And I think that's so you need on the one hand to consider the conditions because the conditions are you cannot develop something without considering the starting point of a place, right? But at the same time, maybe because, there isn't the political will to put enough resources, that's money, because they need money,
Yeah.
but they want cost effective, cost efficient, or they want cheap fixes, as I said, and there is no cheap fix. Then the system really it's a missed opportunity because the system is far from what it should be.
Yeah. And I think that in that regard, it's super important to have these strong, broad coalitions.
Yeah.
Because, as you said, like discussing about care is discussing about tax because we know that Latin America is one of the regions that has this high level of illusion and evasion in tax regimes. And in general, tax regimes are highly regressive. But also, leaving aside tax regimes, Latin America countries are highly dependent on commodities resources, and this make their economies strongly volatile. So have this discussion about structural change, about tax systems, is also necessary to talk about care. Because otherwise, we ended up having targeted public policies with not really good coverage. That is so important to really, really implement good care policies.
Thank you. And moving maybe a little bit forward of what we were discussing, I would like to ask you what kinds of social or political tensions do you think emerge when states attempt to redistribute care responsibilities and the cost of care, obviously, beyond the family? And related to what you were discussing before, who do you think tends to resist care reforms, understanding care reforms as policies for redistributing care responsibilities among the family, the state, the market, and communities?
Hmm.
I think there are all kinds of tensions. There are political tensions. Some of them are, between left and right wing actors and different views, but some of them are beyond within these coalitions that have sustained the reforms that have put together, like children advocates, poverty, anti-poverty network, feminist, disability. Or social movement of disabled people and their families, they have come together, they've worked together, but it's difficult also to keep them together because their vision of care, justice, the equity they want, it's not necessarily the same, and then especially in context where they're not putting the resources, so it becomes my program or your program. So that's the political, I think, challenge, and of course the turn to the right of many countries in Latin America, in Argentina, Chile, Costa Rica, and several others. So that could stop the pace of change, could slow it down considerably or turn it into another direction. I think there is also the economic challenge. It's a big one. It's one that is common to every country, not to Latin America only. It's just like, even when it becomes clear that care reforms are urgent, they, the governments are not willing to put in the money that the sector needs. And so, without the money, and, the money means also the bureaucracy, the governance structures, and which is also costly, then the reforms fail. So the struggle around money, it's crucial. And then finally, I think there is also cultural challenge. And the cultural challenge, it's very visible nowadays. For instance, when political science are writing about why are young men so sexist. And I think I mean, it is like we would not expect any group to lose power in a way without fighting back, and I think part of it is the struggle for power, so rebalancing gender norms in society. um it's not easy, and I think we thought that it was just about changing women, and maybe now maybe we need to think about how also the other side of, yeah.
Yeah, agree. And also just to emphasize that, well, the political landscape at the global level is changing really quickly. And as I said before, the kind of new right that we are seeing now is not the traditional neoliberal right. So, uh, in the past, we saw that the traditional right undermines, in general, welfare policies like care policies, but or like any kind of social protection policies, because they don't believe that are necessary. They don't really believe in social justice or in gender inequality or in having this strong state. But what we are seeing now is different. What we are seeing now is that a new political right that is much more conservative, and also that they are using this panic around falling infertility rates around the world as a cause to as explanation and as a cause to have their own agenda related with care. So it's important to know that there is something that is also happening there, and this reframing of care is actually part of the core of the political agenda from the far right in many different movements around the world, and it's part of strong alliance between political parties, for instance, in the US, between political parties and certain economic groups. So yeah, I think that this is also part of the discussion, and one of the most important challenges to implement care system or care public policies.
Thank you. So, despite all these tensions and challenges, care has increasingly become linked to broader conversations about rights, citizenship, and the future of social protection. And I'd like to end by thinking a bit about what the future of care might look like. And the first question I have for you is, what do you think changes politically and socially when care is framed as a right that rather than primarily as a private family responsibility? And in that context, what do you think are the broader implications, if there are, of course, of the recent recognition of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights of care as a human right?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I am a social policy scholar. So I like welfare states. I really like the language of rights. It links to citizenship. I think actually Latin America has gone farthest in developing this, and they have a really nice discourse about care as a human right. And I think what brings to the fore, in my view, are two things, two core things. The one is the responsibility of the state. And it's true, like, we cannot have equity or equitable and sustainable care in society without strong states that intervene in care and that invest resources in care. And the other that I think, was there academically, but not politically before recent development in Latin America, is that it brings to the fore the importance of the connection between the rights of those that give care, those that work in care, those that receive care. And so it brings that relational perspective that those rights are connected. And that's the base. Deborah Stone wrote why we need a care movement. And she said, rights are a wonderful thing to build the mobilizations around. And so they are vehicles to build these coalitions that we so strongly need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that having this kind of agreements at the global level um, is so important to validate, legitimize, and catalyze these agreements and these partnerships. Sorry, to make a real change, especially because you you are going to have this discussion in the political agenda, and now you have this broad umbrella that says that okay, care is a human right. It is not that some feminists or some like small movements are saying that. It's like a really important international institution. So I think that is extremely important. And regarding the second part of the first part of, of your question, I think that what I would like to see in a society that put care at the center, and especially now that there has been a long discussion amongst different people around care, is to have also a decolonial approach to care, because even if this discussion is extremely important in Latin America, and even if Latin America, even though Latin America is leading this discussion in many different ways, you still see this kind of framing like four pillar of social protection, right? These kind of things that for me is difficult to think about, because about that in Latin America, because welfare states uh, um, are not a reality in Latin America in many different ways. So to think about that in a way is to try again to imitate, at least like in the imagination, what the social organization of well-being, not just care in general, is in Europe. And I don't think that these kind of discussions are useful in Latin American context in many different ways. Because we have uneven realities within the same country. We have strong inequalities, as you said. Labor informality is complicated to implement welfare systems or this kind of four pillar of social protection in countries in which you have really high levels of informality. So I think that's something besides what we discussed that I would like to see in this discussion is a more decolonial approach of these kind of discussions about care.
I think that's a totally valid point, and I agree. I think you see it also, like, in Europe when they say, like, I mean, Italy in some ways, its welfare state is much more similar to some Latin American countries than to the Nordic countries. But then people start to talk about social investment. Can we apply social investment in Italy? Like, what's the progress on social investment? And that's so far away from what the social policy is. So I think, yeah. And I think, of course, when you talk about different regions with different hegemonic power within the world, it's important to have a decolonial approach. I also find it so funny that they're talking about the fourth pillar. I mean, it was a Uruguayan thing, right?
Yes.
The national integrated national care system was supposed to be the fourth pillar of the welfare state. The one that talked about it that I'm aware before it in the same way was Spain with the Ley de Dependencia, the dependency law in 2007. They made the fourth pillar, but it's like, not really, it's like, it's a principle, but not really functioning. And I found it, even from a European perspective, I found it strange to talk about a fourth pillar, or like here in England, in the UK, they're talking about, making social care to the same level of the NHS, like, and we're talking about this when the first, second, and third pillar, like, pensions, health, social assistance, are in crisis. So, what is it about downgrading all the pillar of the welfare state, or are we talking about something? So, I even within, like, Europe, I found that questionable because we're like, the welfare state as we know it, as our the previous generation have experiences, it's not our experience of the welfare state. And that definitely in the context of, like, Latin America, it might not make, uh, might need another language.
Yes, definitely agree.
Thank you, Belén and Rosella. You actually started to answer my last question. This will be our last question of the episode. So to close, I'd love to ask you, what do you think a society that truly values care would look like in your vision?
Okay, I think it's a quite difficult question.
Of course.
But I think that, and I'm thinking it's not my idea. I'm reproducing ideas that I learn a lot from different feminist scholars, like Sean Tronto or even Karen Gilligan, about how important is to put care as part of social organization and the way in which we understand social relations, and not organize every single thing in our societies around market or market rationality, right? I think that this is in an abstract level. This is what I would like to see in a society that put care at the core. But in a more empirical level, which is also important in this kind of discussion, I think that I would like to see a strong state that provide universalistic public policies, or at least try to implement these policies and put care and the different kind of public policies related with care as a priority within the state. And I think that having, as I said before, putting that in the center of the political discussion it could help to have another discussions that are necessarily connected with that, like structural change. Um, because as we mentioned many times, if we don't have the necessary resources to implement this kind of policies, this is not going to happen. Um, Even if we have amazing discussions about care. And I think that in the global south in particular, we need to have this kind of discussions together. What is important? What kind of development we want to have, and what should be the role of care in development debates. So yes, this kind of thing. Thank you.
I think I've given this question a lot of thought through the years because I always feel like the normative, political, and policy research need to be connected. And I'm also inspired by John Tronson's work and many others. But I think I found my answer for now in Evelyn Nagano-Glenn's work and she defines this ideal of a caring society. And a caring society is a society where those that need care, can trust that they will be care, where no one is forced to care, but those that choose to care are rewarded and recognized, and where access to resources for care and responsibility for care is distributed like evenly and equally across social groups defined by gender, class, race, and everything else. And I really like this because I think it also points clearly to coalitions, but also because, it's a very ambitious normative goal to have that. And I think additionally, and maybe this I take from the care ethics perspective, I think that a caring society, and this is really requires not only like, far deep structural change, and it does, but also cultural change. I think it's one where the stigma that is today attached to dependency uh, is dissolved. I mean, it's not only about autonomy, it's also about, people are dependent, we are all vulnerable, but also some people are more dependent and vulnerable than others. And we need to make sure that that doesn't become like a sort of stigma, because then it also reduces not only the value that these people have for society. And you could see that very clearly during COVID in a very atrocious way, I think. But it also, like, for instance, limit their access to services. They self limit just because no one wants. There is a lot of stigma in being a carer, and there is a lot of stigma to being someone that receives care. You're kind of like second class human being in society, and I think I'd like to see that kind of wiped out.
Yeah, and following that, I think that putting care at the center of development debates, it's also important to recognize the work of care workers. That I mean, and leaving aside the importance of the market and like actually connect with care in development, I think that it's important to recognize and value their work and give them the conditions of labor that are necessary to have. And this is part of having much fair societies that recognize a work that is so crucial to everyone and is so underpaid and undervalued and under-recognized. So yeah, I think that recognizing and value the work of caregivers and care workers should be part of this discussion too.
That's, I think, a specific, like a general challenge, but a specific challenge in Latin America is because of the configuration of the organization of care and the heavy reliance on domestic workers and like care workers, is to keep those and the family and women doing unpaid work in family together politically.
Mhm.
It's very challenging, I think.
Yeah.
It's very challenging.
Yes, and also there is this discussion about when you define caregivers and care workers, because broadly speaking, everyone has the possibility of being a caregiver, but define like especially care workers is so important, especially in Latin American context or in general in developing countries, to define specific qualifications, a specific um, um, things that they have to do or things that they don't need to do in their job description. That it's also important to have this as part of collective salary agreements and so on. So I think that in a context of high informality, this kind of discussions takes difficult paths, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Belén, Rossella. Thank you both so much for this conversation. This has been a really insightful conversation and discussion not only about care policy, but about gender inequality and also about the broader question of how do we want our societies to organize and sustain itself. And thank you to everyone listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
for
Belén.
having us.